is Point of Order.
Hello, and welcome to the first edition of Point of Order, a production of the African Center for Parliamentary and Constitutional Studies. I am Chukwudi Ubaja, and you can access us at our social media handles: YouTube at AfricPal Studies, Instagram at AfricPal Studies, and Twitter at AfricPal Study. Connect. We would like to talk with you. The objective of the African Center for Parliamentary and Constitutional Studies is clear: to raise informed and enlightened democratic leaders in Nigeria and Africa through constitutionalism and the rule of law. And one of our avenues is this program, Point of Order. So, what does Point of Order seek to achieve? Of the three arms of government, the legislature is the branch that bears full testimony to being the people's representative, whichever angle it is viewed from. Every member of the legislature, whether at the national, state, or local government level, is an elected official. Not so for the presidency, which, though headed by an elected public servant, does its work with the support of people nominated or appointed to aid the work of the executive. The judiciary is another entity on its own. The legislative arm of government is the only institution of government that can be said to be truly independent of the other arms. As earlier mentioned, they must validate the president or governor's nominations to some posts before such posts pick legitimacy. The legislature makes the laws of the land, and where the president or governor denies assent to the laws they make, the legislature can muster a lawful margin of votes to override the president or governor's stance. This scenario clearly makes the legislature the true bastion of democracy in representative governance. But in spite of their unique role and relevance to the orderly life of society, the work of the legislature in Nigeria is either unwittingly downplayed or, where they are seen to be working in earnest, the typical Nigerian citizen is not fully apprised of what the lawmaker owes them or what needs to be done to support the unique activities of the lawmaker. Democracy suffers a real blow from such an unhealthy situation. This is what Point of Order sets out to address and possibly redress. Point of Order is a production of African Center for Parliamentary and Constitutional Studies. We are opening the program by discussing a strong symbol of authority of the legislature, the mace. Point of Order returns in a minute. We call your attention to two books by notable journalist and social critic Obusom Anyebunem. That's talking about The Legislator's Companion, a handbook for Nigerian legislative assemblies, and Essentials of the Nigerian 1999 Constitution. Get them. You will be grateful you did. And for you, the newly elected legislator, The Legislator's Companion is indeed your companion. Fortify yourself with it. To get any or all of the books, call 0805 541 8376. Again, 0805 541 8376. It is still the maiden edition of our parliamentary program on radio, Point of Order. The most visible symbol of authority of the legislature in many democracies is the parliamentary mace. Yes, the mace is the symbol of authority of a legislative assembly or parliament. In the Nigerian context, it serves as the embodiment and unique symbol of the legislative competence of the National Assembly, State House of Assembly, and Legislative Council of the local government. It is remarkable to note that the plenary session, which is the legislature in the fullness of its constitutional, statutory, and ceremonial glory, is only possible in the presence of its maize. The plenary session is the highest and absolute decision-making organ of the legislature where its maize is on display, unlike other sessions such as the committee and public hearing. The official mace bearer carries the mace and leads the presiding officer, which could be the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House of Representatives, or State House of Assembly, or leader of the Legislative Council, whichever is relevant. The mace bearer lays this symbol of authority on the table. This signifies the commencement of the official business of the day. And at the formal closure of the day's proceedings, the mace is lifted and the presiding officer led out of the chamber, according to parliamentary education. And we quote, "The mace is the symbol of the authority of the House of Representatives and the Speaker. The crown of the mace always points to the government side of the chamber and the Australian coat of arms." We end quote. In the Nigerian case, the coat of arms points to the majority party side on the right hand of the presiding officer in the chamber. The minority or opposition parties occupy the seats on the left side of the presiding officer. The National Assembly's chamber arrangement is in tandem with this parliamentary tradition. In the words of A.T. Adewale, a ceremonial mace is a highly ornamental staff of metal or wood carried before a sovereign or other high official in civic ceremonies by a mace bearer, intended to represent the official's authority. The mace, as used today, derives from the original mace used as a weapon. Procession often features the mace, as on parliamentary or formal academic occasions. In this sense, Nigeria's Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court panels are traditionally ushered in for their proceedings by their respective mace bearers. Similarly, institutions of higher learning processions symbolize the sovereign authority via the mace bearer with this official instrument. It is remarkable that only the House of Representatives Standing Orders 10th edition, ordered to be printed 17th December 2020, of all Nigerian Legislative Assemblies standing orders and or rules makes reference to the mace. So, Order 10, Rules 13 to 15 of the House of Representatives have it that, and we start with 13. The mace is the sacred authority of the House, and only authorized staff of the Sergeant-at-Arms may approach, handle, or remove it in the ordinary course of their official duties. 14 says that no member of the House or his agent may approach, handle, or remove the mace under any circumstance. Order 15, for its part, says any member who approaches or handles the mace shall be liable to suspension or removal from the service of the House and Committee for a period not less than 6 months only, and or any sanction prescribed in the Code of Conduct Manual of the House of Representatives or the House rules having regard to particular circumstances. The presence of the mace in the legislative chambers is an abiding testimony of Nigeria's colonial heritage. We shall rely once more on A.T. Adewale for the history of the parliamentary mace in Nigeria. And we quote, "On the 3rd of October 1960, Princess Alexandra, the Queen's representative, formally opened Nigeria's Independence Parliament before a distinguished assembly of people and diplomats. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, President of the Nigerian Senate and Governor General designate, read out the letters meant for the opening of the Parliament." End of quote. Nigeria's constitutional and political journey experienced a fundamental turnaround on October 1, 1963, with the adoption of a Republican Constitution. That formal termination of the sovereign powers of the British Crown also reflected in our parliamentary maze with the replacement of the Queen's Crown with the Nigerian coat of arms. The maze, as the symbol of authority of the legislature, is also linked with the powers of the presiding officer. Thus, the inauguration processes and procedures by the clerk of the Legislative House are executed without the maze. The maze rises to herald the emergence of the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House of Representatives, or the State House of Assembly, and the leader of a local government legislative council as the official political head of the relevant assembly. When the maze reclines to the lower bracket of the table, it reduces the president, speaker, or leader, whoever the presiding officer is, to a mere chairman in the committee of the whole house. Yes, such is the power of the maze. We are taking yet another break. When we return to take the maiden edition of Point of Order to an end, what happens when the maze suffers denigration and falls into the wrong hands? We will conclude talk on the importance placed on the maze in our final segment of the maiden edition of Point of Order. We call your attention to two books by notable journalist and social critic Obusom Anyebunem. That's talking about The Legislator's Companion, a handbook for Nigerian legislative assemblies, and Essentials of the Nigerian 1999 Constitution. Get them. You will be grateful you did. And for you, the newly elected legislator, The Legislator's Companion is indeed your companion. Fortify yourself with it. To get any or all of the books, call 0805 541 8376. Again, 0805 541 8376. We were saying that when the maze reclines to the lower bracket of the table, it reduces the president, speaker, or leader, whoever the presiding officer is, to a mere chairman in the committee of the whole house. The parliamentary ritual is such that the presiding officer can only reclaim his status on the re-emergence of the maze on the table and his return to the chair. The presiding officer is obliged to give a detailed account of what happened at the committee of the whole, which will be put to vote at plenary. It is beyond reasonable doubt that the Parliament, Legislature, House of Assembly cannot be in a plenary session without the maze. We must also inform you that the maze tradition, as exemplified by the Nigerian experience, is a British heritage that is prevalent in the Commonwealth. It is not in the United States legislative culture. The profound importance of this foremost instrument of the legislature also makes it the target of virtually every crisis within the legislative chamber. The House of Representatives' provision of the standing orders already read attests to this fact. The Senate crisis in 2001, 2002, under the leadership of Chuba Okadibo, also supports this point. The controversy was that security operatives invaded Okadibo's residence to retrieve the Senate maze. The crucial question at this juncture is whether the maze can be in operation outside the official legislative chamber. We have to seek the assistance of the Supreme Court in the case of Inakoju versus Adeleke, per the pronouncement of Justice of the Supreme Court, Nikki Toby. He said, and we quote, "I want to ask a few questions on the maze. Was the maze at the D. Rovans Hotel? If it was there, was that the proper place? If it was not there, can parliamentary decisions be taken constitutionally without the maze? If it was there, who carried it? Was the sergeant at arms there? End of quote. Nikki Tobis was a powerful legal voice in those years of yore. The case was the final decision of the Nigerian Apex Court on the unconstitutional removal of Rashid Ladoja by 18 members of the Oyo State House of Assembly at D. Rovans Hotel in Ibadan in 2005. The stance of the Supreme Court in answer to the above questions, as per the same Nikki Toby, Justice of the Supreme Court, was, and we quote, "In my humble view, a community reading of the two sections shows that the intention of the Constitution is to make the House of Assembly sit physically in the building provided for that purpose." End of quote. Similarly, the same Supreme Court, in the dissenting judgment of Justice of the Supreme Court, Rhodes Viva, in the case of Danladi versus Taraba State House of Assembly, had it that, and we quote, "The notice of allegations of misconduct against the Deputy Governor, the appellant, must be prepared, signed in the House of Assembly within congressional hours, and not outside the House of Assembly or in a guest house." The meeting by about 19 members of the Taraba State House of Assembly in the Majority Leader's guest house to prepare and sign a notice of allegation of misconduct against the Deputy Governor was wrong and unconstitutional. The grave error settles both appeals, as this is the first step to be taken in impeachment proceedings. The legislators were wrong to have met, sat in a guest house. End of quote. It is then evident that the constitutional sitting of a legislature can only hold in its official designated building, and that is the only valid location to lay its mace. The next question is, if two factions emerge from a legislative crisis, which of the factions will be accorded recognition under the law with respect to the legitimacy and legality of the mace? Our humble submission is that since the mace is intrinsically tied to the authority of the presiding officer, if he is not legally removed from that office, he remains the authentic president, speaker, or leader of that legislature, house, or parliament. But he must have the support of the required constitutional number of members to form a quorum in order to function and also abide strictly with the provisions of the Constitution, laws, and standing orders. April 18, 2018 is unforgettable in Nigeria's legislative history. It was a day that hoodlums invaded the Senate chamber of the Federal Republic of Nigeria during plenary, obstructed the proceedings, physically attacked chamber staff, and made away with the mace. If these hoodlums were arraigned before a court of competent jurisdiction, on which act of the National Assembly would the prosecutor have grounded his case? Section 8 of the Legislative House's Powers and Privileges Act 2017 on obstruction of members of the Legislative House provides as follows. 8 subsection 1. A member of a legislative house shall not be obstructed or hindered from gaining entrance into the legislative chambers. 8 subsection 2. A person who A. hinders the movement of a member of a legislative house into the chambers or precincts of a legislative house. B. A person who interferes or disobeys the order given by an officer of a legislative house in performing his official functions. 2C. A person who creates any disturbance which interrupts or likely to interrupt the proceedings of a legislative house. Or 2D. A person who sits or votes in a legislative house while the person is not a member of a legislative house commits an offense and is liable on conviction to a fine not exceeding 100,000 naira or a term of imprisonment for 6 months or both. End of quote. The above provision, if proved beyond reasonable doubt by the prosecutor before the court, will convict the offenders to 6 months imprisonment, a fine of 100,000 naira, or both. Well, all that is past now. But definitely, the above provisions did not envisage or contemplate the gravity of what transpired in the Senate chamber on April 18, 2018. We are also confronted with the query of the invocation of the House of Representatives standing orders provisions on this subject matter. It is tried that what the Legislative House's Powers and Privileges Act 2017 provides for is a criminal offense that is within the jurisdiction of a court of competent jurisdiction and not a legislative assembly. Equally worthy of note is the fact that a State House of Assembly cannot invoke the Legislative House's Powers and Privileges Act 2017. This is because item 47 of the Executive Legislative List provides for powers of the National Assembly and the privileges and immunities of its members. There is no mention of State House of Assembly powers and privileges in the concurrent legislative list, which makes theirs a residual item. Hence, it is beyond the legislative competence of the National Assembly. Therefore, there is urgent need for a holistic review of this fundamental subject by all legislative tiers as we proceed on a new legislative calendar and session as from June 2023. This is Point of Order. We call your attention to 2 books by notable journalist and social critic Obusom Anyebunem. That's talking about The Legislator's Companion, a handbook for Nigerian legislative assemblies, and Essentials of the Nigerian 1999 Constitution. Get them. You will be grateful you did. And for you, the newly elected legislator, The Legislator's Companion is indeed your companion. Fortify yourself with it. To get any or all of the books, call 0805 541 8376. Again, 0805 541 8376. This presentation is sponsored by the African Center for Parliamentary and Constitutional Studies in collaboration with African Parliamentary and Constitutional Publishers Limited. Point of Order is presented by its executive producer, Chukwudi Okoliubaja. The program returns next week. Please join us then. But don't forget to visit our social media handles: YouTube at AfricPal Studies, Instagram at AfricPal Studies, and Twitter at AfricPal Study. Connect. We would like to talk with you. We will be probing, assertive, and professional. That actually is our creed. Thanks for listening.